By the winter of 1850, the McBride twins had learned two things in the Appalachian backwoods. Their grandmother's cruelty had no bottom, and revenge, once planted, grows like a briar vine. The mountains knew secrets that winter. They held them in the hollows between ridges, whispered them through bare hickory branches, and buried them beneath layers of frost that glittered like broken glass in the weak December sun. In a cabin tucked so deep into the Kentucky hills that even the tax collectors forgot it existed, two girls learned that some secrets were worth keeping and others were worth destroying the keeper. Emma and Eliza Hartwell turned 13 the day their grandmother broke Emma's finger. It wasn't the first bone Grandmother Cora had broken, and both girls knew with the certainty of mountain-bred intuition that it wouldn't be the last. But there was something about that particular morning, the way the ice hung from the eaves like teeth, the way the chickens had gone silent in their coop, the way even the wind seemed to hold its breath, that marked it as a beginning rather than just another incident in a long catalogue of cruelties. The twins had been born on a night when the stars fell from the sky, or so their mother had told them before the fever took her 3 years back. Their father had gone first, crushed beneath a widowmaker while logging up near the ridge. The tree had been sound when he started cutting. Everyone said so, but it split wrong and caught him across the chest. He'd lived long enough to be carried home, long enough to see his daughters' faces one last time, long enough to whisper something to their mother that neither girl could hear, but both somehow understood. Keep them safe from her. But Mother couldn't keep that promise from beyond the grave, and so the twins had fallen under Grandmother Cora's care, like rabbits falling into a snare. Emma stood at the washboard now, her left hand cradled against her chest, the finger already swelling purple. She didn't cry. Crying only made Grandmother angrier. But Eliza could see the trembling in her sister's shoulders, could feel it in her own body, like they were still connected by that mysterious cord that had bound them in the womb. Eliza continued scrubbing the lice soap into their grandmother's undergarments, her hands raw and red from the cold water. The wash shed was barely warmer than outside, and their breath plumed in the air like ghosts trying to escape their mouths. "You're thinking loud," Emma whispered, so quiet that only her twin could hear. Eliza didn't deny it. They'd discovered years ago that they could sense each other's thoughts when strong emotions ran high. Not words exactly, but feelings and images that passed between them like smoke through a screen. Right now, Emma would be feeling the black rage that coiled in Eliza's belly, like a snake preparing to strike. "She's getting worse," Eliza said, her voice barely a breath. "She's always been like this." "Not always. Remember when Mama was alive? She kept her distance then." Emma nodded slightly, wincing as the movement jarred her hand. "Mama knew things, mountain things. Grandmother was afraid of her." This was true, though neither girl could have explained exactly how they knew it. Their mother had been a quiet woman, small and dark-haired like her daughters, but there had been something in her eyes that made even the meanest dogs go quiet. She'd known which herbs could heal and which could harm, could predict the weather by the taste of the morning air, and always knew when someone was lying. The hill folk had called her a knowing woman, which was different from calling someone a witch, but occupied the same shadow space in people's minds. Grandmother Cora, by contrast, was all sharp edges and bitter words. She was tall, where her daughter-in-law had been small, broad, where she'd been delicate, loud, where she'd been soft-spoken. Cora Hartwell had buried 2 husbands and 3 children, including her only son, the girl's father, and blamed the world for every loss. The twins suspected she blamed them most of all for living when her son had died, for looking so much like their mother, for breathing air in a cabin that had grown too full of ghosts. The washboard rhythm faltered as Eliza's mind wandered to dark places. Emma's whisper pulled her back. "Don't think it. Not yet. You know what I'm thinking?" "I always know, and you're right, but not yet. We're not ready." Eliza wanted to argue, but her sister's calm certainty, so at odds with her injured hand and trembling shoulders, gave her pause. Emma was the patient one, the planner, the twin who could wait through anything. Eliza was fire to Emma's ice, quick anger to her sister's slow burn. Together, they made something balanced, something more than either could be alone. The cabin door slammed open and both girls flinched. Grandmother Cora's voice carried across the frozen yard like a crow's caw. "You lazy creatures, sun's been up for 3 hours and those clothes ain't hung yet." Eliza bit back the words that wanted to spill out. "Emma's hurt, you vicious old woman, and it's your fault." And instead called out, "Almost finished, grandmother." "Almost ain't good enough. Your mother would have had 2 washings done by now." The invocation of their mother was a familiar weapon, one Grandmother Cora wielded often. Your mother would be ashamed. Your mother was soft, and look where it got her. Your mother thought she was special, but she died just like everyone else. Emma's good hand found Eliza's beneath the washwater, squeezed once, a signal they'd developed long ago. Hold steady. Don't give her the satisfaction. They worked in silence until the washing was done, then hauled the heavy basket between them out to the line. The clothes would freeze before they dried properly, but that was how winter washing went in the mountains. They'd bring them in, stiff as boards, and hang them by the fire to thaw. Grandmother Cora watched from the cabin window, her face pale and flat behind the wavy glass, like a corpse pressed against the other side. Neither girl looked directly at her, but both felt the weight of her gaze. "Tonight," Emma breathed as they hung the last shirt. "What about tonight?" "I'll tell you, after she's asleep." The day crawled past with the peculiar slowness of winter days in the mountains, where the sun seemed to barely climb above the ridges before starting its descent. The twins went through their chores with mechanical precision, gathering eggs from chickens that pecked viciously at cold stiff fingers, splitting kindling, though their hands ached with cold hauling water from the spring, even though the path was treacherous with ice. Grandmother Cora sat by the fire most of the day, working on a quilt that she'd been piecing together for months. It was made from scraps of clothing from all the dead Hartwells, a patchwork monument to loss. The girl's father's work shirt formed one corner, their mother's Sunday dress another. Sometimes Eliza wondered if Grandmother Cora was making a shroud large enough to pull the whole family down into death with her. Supper was cornmeal mush and dried beans, seasoned with the salt pork they'd put up in the fall. It was the same meal they ate most nights, varied only by the occasional rabbit or squirrel if Eliza proved lucky with the snares. Grandmother Cora believed in plain eating, claimed that too much flavor led to sinful thoughts and loose behavior. The old woman watched them eat with vulture eyes, looking for infractions. Emma had learned to eat left-handed years ago, after too many meals interrupted by a strike across the knuckles for using her fork wrong or chewing too loudly, or simply existing in a way that irritated their grandmother. Tonight she managed a spoon with her right hand despite the broken finger, her face pale but determined. Eliza wanted to tell her to stop, to rest the hand, but she knew her sister's pride wouldn't allow it. "That finger of yours looks poorly," Grandmother Cora said, her tone suggesting this was somehow Emma's fault. "It'll mend," Emma said softly. "Wouldn't have broken if you hadn't been clumsy. I barely touched you." Eliza's spoon clattered against a bowl. Both her grandmother and sister looked at her sharply. "Sorry," Eliza muttered. "Slipped." "You've got your mother's careless hands," Grandmother Cora said. "Pretty to look at, useless for work. She couldn't keep hold of nothing important either. Not her husband, not her health, not her good sense." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Eliza focused on her bowl, counting the beans. 7, 8, 9. Anything to keep from saying what she wanted to say, from doing what she wanted to do. Emma's foot pressed against hers under the table. "Hold steady." After supper, the girls washed the dishes, while Grandmother Cora returned to her quilting. The old woman's needle flashed in the firelight, pulling thread through fabric with vicious precision. In, out, like she was stitching wounds instead of cloth. "You'll sleep in the loft tonight," Grandmother Cora announced without looking up from her work. "I can't abide the sound of your breathing, like two little animals scratching at the walls." The loft was bitterly cold, but at least it offered privacy. The twins climbed the ladder in silence, carrying their thin blankets and the heated stones they were allowed to warm their bed with. The loft was really just a shelf built across one end of the cabin, open to the room below, but far enough up that Grandmother Cora couldn't easily reach them. They arranged their pallet, really just a straw tick, and their blankets, and huddled together for warmth, waiting. Below, they could hear their grandmother's rocker creaking, the needle clicking against her thimble, the occasional pop from the fire. After what felt like hours, the creaking stopped. They heard Grandmother Cora banking the fire, muttering her nightly prayers that sounded more like curses than devotions, shuffling to her bed in the corner. More time passed. Then came the sounds they'd been waiting for, the deep, rhythmic breathing that meant she'd fallen asleep. Emma shifted closer to Eliza, her lips nearly touching her sister's ear. "I found something in the woods 3 days ago up by the Lightning Hook." "Found what?" "A root cellar, old, maybe from before Grandmother's time, hidden under deadfall." Eliza's heart quickened. "So?" "So it has a door, a good strong door with a bar on the outside." The implications hung in the cold air between them. Eliza turned her head to look at her sister, though in the darkness she could barely make out Emma's features. They'd been identical since birth. Same dark hair, same grey eyes, same sharp chin and full mouth. But the darkness erased even those small differences that had emerged over the years. They could have been one person split into two bodies, or two halves of a single soul. "That's not enough," Eliza whispered. She'd just yell until someone came. "The Johnsons aren't more than 2 miles down the valley. I know That's why we need to wait. Plan it right. Plan what exactly? What are we talking about doing, Emma? But Eliza knew. The knowing had been growing in both of them, like ice forming on a pond, starting thin and fragile but thickening with each cruelty, each bruise, each night. They went to bed hungry because Grandmother Cora decided they'd committed some infraction that required punishment. Emma's voice was steady, almost eerily calm. Remember what Mama used to say? The mountains take care of their own, and the mountains take care of their own. She meant that 2 different ways. Yes, Emma, we can't. Can't we? How many more bones, Eliza? How many more years? She's only 67. She could live another 20 years. We'd be 33 before we escaped her, if we even survived that long. There's other ways. We could run. Go to Lexington, find work. With no money, no skills but farming and washing. 2 13-year-old girls alone. We wouldn't last a month. You know it as well as I do. Eliza did know it. The world beyond the mountains was hard on everyone, but it was especially hard on orphan girls with no protection. They'd heard the stories. Girls who disappeared into brothels, factories that worked children to death, streets where you could starve while surrounded by plenty. The mountains were brutal, but they were the devil the twins knew. Think on it, Emma said. We don't have to decide tonight, but we do need to start preparing, just in case. Preparing how? Gathering supplies, food that won't spoil, a good rope, the axe sharpened proper, things we'd need for whatever might come. The conversation drifted into silence, both girls lost in their own dark thoughts, but feeling each other's presence like a second heartbeat. Below, Grandmother Cora snored, oblivious to the plotting in the loft above her head. Eliza dreamed that night of her mother. In the dream, they were standing at the edge of the woods, and Mama was teaching her to read signs in the forest. The way moss grew on the north side of trees, how to tell a game trail from a deer path, where to find ginseng and golden seal. But then Mama's face changed, becoming sharp and hard, and when she spoke, it was with Grandmother Cora's voice. You've got murder in your heart, girl, and murder always finds its way out. She woke with a start, to find Emma already awake beside her, staring at the rough-hewn rafters above their heads. Bad dream? Emma whispered. Mama! Me too. She was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear her. There was too much wind. The twins lay in silence as dawn crept through the cracks in the walls. Below, they heard Grandmother Cora stirring, the familiar sounds of her morning routine beginning, the rattle of the stove door, the clank of the kettle, the shuffle of her feet on the puncheon floor. Girls! The shout came like a gunshot. Daylight's burning. Get yourselves down here. Another day beginning like all the others, except now there was a weight in the air, a heaviness that hadn't been there before. The twins had named the thing that had been growing between them, given it shape and purpose, and now it couldn't be unnamed. They climbed down from the loft to find Grandmother Cora in a particularly foul mood. The fire hadn't started properly, and she blamed them for not laying it correctly the night before. Never mind that she'd done it herself. In Grandmother Cora's world, everything wrong was someone else's fault, and that someone was usually the twins. Lazy, worthless creatures, she muttered, stirring the porridge with violent strokes. Should have drowned you both when you was born. 2 more mouths to feed, and Not a lick of sense between you. Emma moved carefully around the cabin, favoring her injured hand. Eliza caught their grandmother watching her sister with an expression that might have been satisfaction or might have been something darker. It was hard to tell with Grandmother Cora. Cruelty and pleasure seemed to occupy the same space in her heart. The morning passed in the usual way. Chores performed under constant criticism, meals eaten in hostile silence, the oppressive weight of Grandmother Cora's presence filling every corner of the cabin like smoke from a bad fire. But something had shifted. The twins moved through their tasks with a new awareness, seeing everything as potential tools or obstacles. The axe by the woodpile. How sharp was it really? Could it be sharpened more? The root cellar door. How heavy? How strong? The distance to the nearest neighbors. Too close for screaming, but far enough that regular sounds wouldn't carry. Around midday, Grandmother Cora announced she needed to visit the privy and for the girls to start on the mending while she was gone. The moment the door closed behind her, Emma grabbed Eliza's arm. The loft. There's loose floorboards in the far corner. We can hide things there. What things? Whatever we need. Start with food, things that'll keep. They worked quickly, their movements synchronized by years of twin-born understanding. A pouch of dried apples went into a fold of cloth, a handful of walnuts, a small jar of honey that Grandmother Cora kept hidden, thinking the girls didn't know about it. She'll notice, Eliza hissed. Not if we're careful, just a little at a time. They heard the privy door slam and scrambled back to their mending just as Grandmother Cora entered, eyeing them with suspicion. You two are mighty still. What are you plotting? Nothing, Grandmother, they said in unison, which only made her more suspicious. But she couldn't prove anything, so she settled back into her rocker with her eternal quilting, needle flashing like a tiny weapon. The days that followed fell into a new pattern. On the surface, everything continued as before, the endless cycle of chores, the meals of plain food, the nights in the cold loft. But underneath, a plan was taking shape like ice forming on a winter pond. Emma showed Eliza the root cellar one afternoon when Grandmother Cora sent them to gather pine knots for kindling. It was exactly as Emma had described, old, half-collapsed, but with a door that still hung true on its leather hinges. The bar across the outside was sturdy oak, and when they tested it, the door held firm against their combined pushing. How did you even find this? Eliza asked, examining the entrance, hidden under years of deadfall and leaf litter. I was tracking that rabbit you missed with your snare, followed it up here, and nearly fell through the roof. Look. She pointed to where she'd already begun the work of clearing access to the door while making it look like the covering of debris was still intact. Someone would have to know exactly where to look to spot the disturbance. Emma, are we really going to do this? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe just having a plan makes it easier to bear what is, like knowing there's a way out, even if we never take it. But they both knew that was a lie. They'd crossed some invisible line in their thinking, and there was no going back to the way things were. Every new bruise, every harsh word, every night they went to bed with hunger gnawing their bellies. It all became evidence in a case they were building against their grandmother. The breaking point came on a bitter January morning when the snow lay deep and the smoke from the cabin chimney rose straight up into a sky so blue It hurt to look at it. Grandmother Cora had been in a mood for days, the kind that meant anything could set her off. The girls had learned to read these moods, to make themselves small and quiet. But sometimes that wasn't enough. Sometimes the old woman's anger needed a target regardless of what the twins did or didn't do. It started over biscuits. Eliza had made them, following the recipe exactly as Grandmother Cora had taught her. But when the old woman bit into one, she spat it out in disgust. Too much salt. But I measured. Don't you dare contradict me, girl. The blow came fast, catching Eliza across the cheek and spinning her into the table. Stars exploded behind her eyes, and she tasted blood where her teeth had cut her lip. Emma moved without thinking, putting herself between her sister and their grandmother. Stop it, just stop. Grandmother Cora's face went white, then red. You dare raise your voice to me? She didn't do anything wrong. The biscuits are fine. You're just looking for reasons to hurt us. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. Grandmother Cora's eyes went flat and dead, and for a moment both girls thought she might actually kill them right there, in the cold light of that January morning. Instead, she smiled. It was worse than if she'd hid them. The smile was thin and cold and promised future pain beyond anything they'd experienced yet. You think you know suffering, Grandmother Cora said softly. You think a few slaps and a missed meal here and there is suffering. I'll show you what real suffering is. Both of you, out to the woodshed. Now. The woodshed was where punishment happened, away from the cabin, where screams would be muffled by the walls and the wind. The girls had been there before, but never together, and never after Emma had dared to directly challenge their grandmother. They walked through the snow in silence, Grandmother Cora behind them with the leather strap she used for punishments. It was an old horse rein, worn soft in some places and still stiff in others, and it left marks that lasted for days. The woodshed was dark and cold, smelling of sawdust and old bark. Grandmother Cora pointed to the chopping block. Both of you, hands flat. They knew what was coming. The strap would fall across their hands until Grandmother Cora's arm got tired or her anger burned out, whichever came first. It was a punishment designed not just to hurt, but to make simple tasks, holding a spoon, working the washboard, kneading bread, an agony for days afterward. Emma went first, placing her hands on the rough wood. Her broken finger had barely started to heal, and Eliza knew this would set it back, maybe permanently. The first blow fell with a crack that seemed to echo in Eliza's own bones. Emma's face went white, but she didn't cry out. Eliza felt her sister's pain like it was her own, felt the rage building in her chest like a scream that had no way out. By the fifth blow, Emma was shaking. By the 10th, tears were streaming down her face, though she still made no sound. Your turn, Grandmother Cora said to Eliza, breathing hard from the exertion. Eliza placed her hands on the block. The wood was wet with Emma's blood, where her rebroken finger had split. The strap fell again and again, until Eliza lost count. The pain was white-hot, all-consuming, and through it all, she felt Emma's presence in her mind, sharing the agony, making it bearable by halving it between them. Finally, it stopped. Grandmother Cora stood over them, sweating despite the cold, her face flushed with exertion and something that looked almost like ecstasy. Now get back to the cabin and finish your chores. And if I hear one word of complaint, we'll do this again tonight." The walk back to the cabin was a blur. Their hands were ruined, swollen and bleeding, barely able to hold anything. But they managed to finish the day's chores through sheer stubborn will, helping each other, moving as one unit as they'd done since birth. That night in the loft, Emma whispered, "Spring." "What?" "We do it in spring, after the thaw, but before people start traveling the roads again, March, maybe early April." "Emma." "She would have killed us today if she'd had the courage. You felt it too, don't deny it. Something in her wants us dead, has wanted us dead since Mama passed. She's just been working up to it." Eliza knew her sister was right. There had been something in Grandmother Cora's eyes today, something that went beyond anger or cruelty into a realm where murder lived. "Tell me the whole plan," Eliza said, and Emma did. They would wait for a day when Grandmother Cora sent them to the far end of their property, which she did every few weeks to check the fence line. They'd tell her they needed to go farther, that they'd spotted a weakness in the fence near the lightning oak. Emma would remember the root cellar, suggest they could store some tools there to make future repairs easier. They'd get their grandmother to inspect it, and then they would do what needed to be done. "How long?" Eliza asked when the plan was laid out. "How long what?" "How long would we leave her there?" Emma was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. Long enough." "Long enough for what?" "Long enough for it to be over, for her to not be a problem anymore." "That could take days, weeks even, in that cellar, in the cold." "I know. Emma, that's not just murder, that's torture." "Yes." The word hung between them, simple and terrible. Below, Grandmother Cora coughed in her sleep, and both girls flinched. "Is there another way?" Eliza asked, though she knew the answer. "No. Not if we want to be free, not if we want to survive." They lay in silence, holding their ruined hands carefully, each lost in their own dark thoughts, but connected by that twin bond that let them feel each other's hearts beating in terrible synchrony. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin like something trying to get in, or maybe trying to warn them about what they were planning to let out. The mountains had secrets, yes, but they also had consequences, and both girls were old enough to know that some actions echo through generations. "I'm scared," Eliza finally whispered. "Me too. But we're really going to do it?" Emma's hand found hers in the dark, careful of the wounds, and squeezed gently. "Yes. Come spring, we're going to do it." And so the winter crawled on, each day another stitch in the shroud they were weaving for their grandmother. They bore her cruelties with new stoicism, knowing each blow brought spring closer. They gathered supplies in secret, dried meat, candles, rope. They tested the root cellar door again and again, making sure it would hold. They practiced their story until it was smooth as river stones. And through it all, Grandmother Cora suspected nothing. She was too convinced of her own power, too certain that the twins were broken beyond any thought of rebellion. She had beaten them so thoroughly for so long that she couldn't imagine them biting back. It was her last mistake, and it would prove fatal. February brought storms that buried the cabin in snow up to the windows. The three of them were trapped together in that small space, breathing the same air, eating the same food, and with every passing day, the twins' resolve hardened like iron in a forge. March came in with false promise of warmth, followed by a late freeze that killed early crocuses and reminded everyone that winter wasn't done yet. But the days were getting longer, and there was a quality to the light that spoke of coming change. The twins turned 14 in the middle of March. Grandmother Cora didn't acknowledge the day, but Emma gave Eliza a small carved bird she'd made in secret, and Eliza gave Emma a smooth river stone she'd been carrying in her pocket, worn soft by years in the current. "For luck," Eliza said. "We'll need it," Emma replied. And then, on a morning in early April, when the snow had melted enough to expose the ground and the first spring birds were calling in the trees, Grandmother Cora announced that the girls needed to check the fence line. Emma met Eliza's eyes across the breakfast table. It was time. The morning arrived like any other, which somehow made it worse. Emma had expected the day to feel different, to announce itself with some ominous sign, a blood-red sunrise perhaps, or an unnatural stillness in the air. Instead, April delivered a perfectly ordinary dawn, the sun rising over the eastern ridge in shades of pink and gold, birdsong trickling through the awakening forest, and the smell of coffee boiling on the stove, mixing with wood smoke, and the damp earth scent that came with spring thaw. Eliza stood at the wash basin, scrubbing her face with cold water, and caught her sister's reflection in the small cracked mirror they shared. Emma stood behind her, braiding her hair with methodical precision, and their eyes met in the glass. No words passed between them, but the question was clear. "Are we really going to do this?" Emma's slight nod was answer enough. Grandmother Cora was in rare form that morning, almost pleasant, which put both girls on edge. Experience had taught them that the old woman's good moods were often more dangerous than her bad ones. They suggested she was planning something, storing up energy for a particularly cruel punishment, or simply luring them into a false sense of security before striking. "Eat up," she said, ladling cornmeal mush into their bowls with something approaching generosity. "You'll need your strength for the fence line. I heard the Johnsons' hogs have been rooting around up near our property. Don't want them tearing down what we worked to build." The "we" was laughable. The twins had built that fence over 2 summers, hauling and splitting rails, while Grandmother Cora sat in the shade and criticized the angle of every post, the tightness of every wire. But they said nothing, just ate their breakfast and accepted the canteen of water and packet of cold biscuits she provided for their lunch. "Check the whole line," Grandmother Cora instructed, as they pulled on their work boots and coats. "All the way up to the Lightning Oak and back around. I don't want any excuses about not finishing." "Yes, ma'am," they chorused. The girls set out with the fence tool, a heavy iron contraption for tightening wire, and a coil of extra wire in case they found breaks. They also carried the axe, ostensibly for clearing any deadfall they might encounter, but really for something else entirely. Emma had spent weeks sharpening it in secret, and the blade now gleamed with an edge that could split hair. They walked to the fence line, took them through the woods that surrounded their property, following deer trails and half-remembered paths. Neither spoke much, saving their breath for the climb and their words for when they'd need them most. But Eliza could feel her sister's thoughts pressing against her own, a constant thrum of anxiety and determination mixed together like oil and water, never quite blending. They'd gone perhaps a mile when Emma stopped so suddenly that Eliza nearly ran into her back. "What?" "Shh, listen." Eliza strained her ears, but heard nothing unusual. Birds, the whisper of wind through pine branches, the distant sound of water running somewhere over rocks. Then she heard it. Footsteps, heavy and labored, coming up the trail behind them. "She's following us," Emma breathed. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't part of the plan. Grandmother Cora never followed them on their work assignments, claimed she couldn't walk the rough terrain anymore with her bad knees. But there she was, cresting the rise behind them, breathing hard but moving with grim determination. "Did she suspect?" Eliza whispered. "I don't know. Doesn't matter now. We keep to the plan." The girls resumed walking, forcing themselves not to look back, not to run. They could hear Grandmother Cora behind them, could hear her muttering to herself as she struggled up the slope. Once or twice they caught words. "Lazy girls. Think I don't know. Sneaking around." So she did suspect something, though perhaps not the full truth. The girls had been careful, or so they thought, but maybe not careful enough. Maybe Grandmother Cora had noticed the missing food, the times they disappeared into the woods together, the whispered conversations cut short when she entered a room. The fence line, when they reached it, was in better condition than Grandmother Cora had suggested. The Johnsons' hogs hadn't been near it. That had just been an excuse to send them out here. But why? And why follow them? Emma made a show of examining a section of fence, tugging on wires, checking posts. Grandmother Cora emerged from the trees, her face red and sweating, despite the cool morning air. "Find anything?" she asked, her tone deceptively casual. "Not yet, Grandmother," Emma said. "We were just about to head up toward the Lightning Oak. I thought I saw some weakness there last time." It was the moment of truth. Their plan hinged on getting Grandmother Cora to follow them to the root cellar, to trick her into going inside to inspect it. But with the old woman already suspicious, already having followed them this far, would she fall for it? Grandmother Cora's eyes narrowed. "The Lightning Oak? That's quite a ways further." "Yes, ma'am, but you wanted the whole line checked." A long pause. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, "Lead the way." They walked in single file now. Emma in front, Eliza in the middle, Grandmother Cora bringing up the rear. The positions felt symbolic, like they were climbing towards something that couldn't be undone, with the old woman driving them forward even as she was being led to her own doom. The Lightning Oak was ancient, its trunk split and scarred by the bolt that had struck it years before anyone living could remember. It stood as a landmark that every hill person knew, visible for miles when the leaves were down. More importantly for the twins' purposes, it stood just 50 yards from the hidden root cellar. "I don't see any fence problems here," Grandmother Cora said, surveying the area with suspicious eyes. "No, Mom," Emma agreed. "But I was thinking, remember how we always talk about needing a place to store tools up here, so we don't have to carry them back and forth?" "What of it?" "Well, I found something a few weeks back. An old root cellar. Looks like it's from when the Hendersons owned this land. The door still works and everything. Could be useful." Grandmother Cora's expression shifted, interest warring with mistrust. "Show me." Emma led them to the spot, helping Eliza clear away the brush they'd carefully replaced after their last visit. The root cellar's entrance emerged from the hillside like a mouth opening. The door set at an angle into the slope.